I hope I hope I do justice to the translation. It says that people who are family members need to have a way to play together and trade together in order to develop a relationship. That by working together and trading together, they're able to develop trust and many other forms of relationships amongst themselves. Again, I have paraphrased, and again, I hope I've done justice to that translation. But the key concept is that when we say African unity, I believe that for us to have this unity, we must begin to trade together and we must begin to work together. Now, if you use some of the statistics and data in terms of interregional trade, so interregional trade in North America is give or take about 60%. Interregional trade in Asia is about 35–40%. However, interregional trade in Africa is less than 10%. So what that tells you is that those numbers, even from an economic and financial point of view, give you an idea of the fact that within Africa, we're actually not relating with ourselves enough, because the economics gives you an overview of the relationships between each of the individual countries. So the lowest prior to Africa was Asia, and they are in the 35–40% range of interregional trade. Within Africa, interregional trade, just as I said, is less than 10%. By some estimates, is as low as 4%. By other estimates, is about 7%. So I also use an example from way back when I ran an e-commerce firm in Africa about a decade or so ago. And we had to send a package from the city of Lagos in Nigeria, West Africa, to a city in Malawi. And rather than it, because there was no direct connection between those two countries, what ended up happening was that that package, first of all, went to the UK, and then from the UK, it went to South Africa, and then from South Africa, it now went to Malawi. Now, these are economic indicators of the difficulty of trade and, by extension, relationships between the countries in Africa. So when you say, what is the picture of unity that I see? The picture of unity would be the opportunity for us to be able to play together, for us to be able to work towards achieving each other's goals. If you take China, for example, where we are domiciled today, China's largest trading partners are not necessarily Europe, but it's actually those that are around them. What happens to your neighbor also has a direct impact on you. So again, answering the question directly, to my mind, African unity means the ability for us to play together and the ability for us to watch out for each other and for us to grow collectively.
Thank you very much. I think we have gotten a concept, and but I would still like to call Mr. Charles Okeke to chip in something. So what is your own vision or your own ideology about African unity at this point?
All right, thank you very much. I might perhaps just have to buttress what Mr. Debo said. Most importantly, it's about cohesion. It's about integration. It's about unification of all sorts. And that is what, of course, he has been able to explain to us using some examples with aviation, with logistics and what have you. But again, to add to that, it is important for Africans to understand that we need to increase our capacity in terms of trying to realize that goal of unity. And by increasing our capacity, I mean that we have to have this political cohesion. We have to have cultural cohesion. We must have social cohesion, linguistic cohesion, religious cohesion, etc. So with all of that in mind, African people will begin to have this sense of inclusiveness. We'll begin to have this sense of oneness. So if we talk about, for example, what Mr. Debo said, flying a particular shipment from point A to point B within the space of Africa, but it has to go through Europe and back to Africa. It means that we don't have that capacity in terms of the right civil aviation. So how do we improve that? We also have to improve that thinking inwards, thinking about Africa unity. How do we now integrate ourselves as one people within the concept of Africa, within the concept of the continent, and of course, within the concept ultimately of our own economic emancipation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. From what I gathered, you guys, you said, both of you, OKK and Mr. Debo, you said it's about cohesion. That cohesion is not there, right? Because what country A is doing doesn't concern country B, and country C is like, whatever, let's go our own way. Now, this brings this worry to mind. Should we just let this concept of African unity go? Is it abstract? Will it ever happen? Or this ideology, will it ever come to reality in this 21st century? And if you think this is true, that it will never come to reality, or if you think otherwise, that it will come to reality, what is the way forward? Should we end this conversation and each country tries to be the superpower that they can be if it will ever happen? Or if you think, well, the fight or all hope is not lost yet, we can still win this fight and the war and the battle, whatever perspective you want to look at it. What have you to say, Mr. Charles?
Okay, thank you again, Jackson. This is a very interesting conversation. You see, when you talk about Africa unity, of course, it's not entirely new. We have to, of course, trace it back to the days of our liberation. I'm talking about political liberation, of course. And again, the days of our own founding fathers, the Nkrumahs of our world, the Abdul Nassers of our world, the Ahmed Bembelas of this world, the Julius Nyereres, the Modibo Keitas, the Sekou Tourés of Africa. You will understand that the whole idea behind the Organization of African Unity, which was founded in 1963, was about African unity. And Nkrumah was very equivocal when he said that Africa needs to unite if we are going to make any headway, political, economical, social, cultural, etc. And what he was saying was very simple. He said that for Africa to be able to break away from that chains of colonialism, neo-colonialism, as he explained, we have to come together as one unit. And that was in 1963. Now we are in 2020. It's very interesting that in 2020, we are still talking about Africa unity, which started as far back as 1963, as I said again. So it is not all hope lost for me. I think that we still have to make these ancestors, I'm talking about our founding fathers, very proud. If we keep to this spirit, if we still believe that, of course, we can realize Africa unity by, again, understanding their concept from the beginning. And that concept was all about we understanding that before the incursion of the Europeans into Africa, we did not have boundaries. And what that means is that a man from Nigeria, today Nigeria, did not know that he was from Nigeria. And he could migrate for any reason from Nigeria to, let's say, today's Kenya, without thinking that is in a strange or in a foreign land. That is unity for me. And that was what the likes of Nkrumah were trying to let us understand. So again, this unity must go beyond this mindset that we have boundaries, and these boundaries are very sacrosanct and nobody can break them. No. We must believe in the concept of African unity, that we are one people and there are no boundaries. And again, it is realistic, it is realizable. And going forward in this conversation, I'm going to give other reasons for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Then I'll come to you, Mr. Debo. From what Mr. Charles Okeke has said, it is realizable. And if we look at the visions that the likes of Nkrumah brought forward during the foundation of African Union, yes, the OAU in those days. Do you think at this age, at this point in time of our history, we can actually achieve unity with respect to that vision? Or we need to redefine the concept of unity in the 21st century?
Thank you. I largely agree with Mr. Okeke. And he makes very valid points because African unity, or the story of African unity, or the desire for African unity is not new. He has cited the Nkrumahs from the 50s and all what have you. I have read documentations from the 1700s, as far back, I believe, 1743, even talking about unity across Africa. So it's not new. The thing, though, is that we now need to begin to look at the practicality of how that is actually supposed to function. So whilst it is desirable for, there are lots of barriers, and so it usually would involve some kind of thinking in terms of what are these barriers and how can you actually remove them. I give an example. Last year, I carried a West African passport. I visited East Africa, and during my trip, I visited Kenya in East Africa. Then I flew to Uganda. Then I flew to Tanzania, and then there's one more. I visited 5 countries in East Africa during that trip. In each of, at the time, for those countries, for one of those countries, I had to have gotten a visa in advance. But for the other countries, I was able to actually get there and get what they call a visa on arrival. Now, visiting these countries in East Africa and all, unfortunately, one of them was actually saying, and this is last year, that they cannot actually visit some of the West African countries without getting a visa in advance. Now, this is also an African country. It is easier for an American to visit all the countries in Africa than it is for a Cameroonian to visit West African countries. So when we say unity, there are lots of barriers, and a lot of these barriers, I say, first of all, that if you look at it from an economic and financial point of view, then you will now be able to think about how does this actually work and what does it cause? Today, I don't think that people actually quantify the economic losses of us as Africans not trading together. Very few organizations have sat down to look at what is the trade volume between each country and the 54 other nations in Africa. So, for example, the biggest economy in Africa today, I believe, if from the numbers at least, is Nigeria, and then South Africa, and then Egypt. At least on the African continent, not necessarily sub-Saharan Africa. What is the trade volume? Now, I remember seeing data saying that using Nigeria as an example, of the 55 countries, Nigeria only had trading relationships with about 14 countries. And then with the rest, it had very, very minimal trading relationships. South Africa had trading relationships with about 30 of those countries, and then with the rest, none. Egypt had even less, give or take about, I think the number for Egypt was in the range of like 10 to 15, thereabout, in terms of its own relationships with other African countries and all. So I keep hammering on trade, because if you have no trading relationship or no business with the other country, then whatever happens in that country does not affect you. And because if you feel that that thing does not affect you, then basically things like economic turmoil, economic hardship, and even the ability to learn from each other becomes very difficult. I said just now that it's easier for an American to visit all 55 countries in Africa than someone from Cameroon. That is a fact. And then it now means that we need to begin to look at ourselves. What are the structures and what are the barriers holding us back? If we look at things from an ideology perspective, it begins to be difficult because you would need buy-in of different people for ideology. However, from an economic perspective, you can usually, and I say not all the time, but usually sell the idea of a general well-being and cause for integration. Look, still, sorry, I keep on spitting out data, but in Africa today, you have about 14 countries that speak French primarily. You have, 13 countries that speak French primarily. You have about 15 countries that speak English primarily. Then you have, give or take, about 10 countries that speak both English and French. And then you now have some countries that speak Arabic primarily. The thing is, if you look at it that way, a lot of those who speak French don't necessarily interact a lot with those who speak English, and vice versa. And those who speak Arabic don't necessarily interact with those who speak English or French, and things like that. So if you look at it purely from an ideology or even a religious basis, it becomes hard to implement. But if you look at it from a financial and economic perspective, then it is now in everybody's interest to actually collectively come, and I use the word, play together.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this, from what both of you have said, draws up to our next question, which we're talking about unity factors and unity figures, which could either be tangible or intangible. Now, if we're looking at the unity factors around which Africans are supposed to unite, while the figures are the voices that speak for the purpose of coordination of group efforts, right? But there is a popular claim that says Africans love to pull down unity figures, except if that figures is for oneself. Now, from all you've said, it shows that each country or each Africa as an individual is only concerned when there is a personal gain. But when it comes to, for Africa as a whole to benefit from such, everyone starts moving in the other direction. How true is this? I'll start with you, Mr. Okeke.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think if I understood your question, you are trying to say that major African, perhaps what I would describe as political freedom fighters, have been pulled down so many times, and perhaps that explains why African unity has been a difficult cause. Again, yes, that is very correct. At least history will bear witness to that. If you look at what happened in, let me say, Burkina Faso before 1987, when Thomas Sankara was killed, you find out that this was a young, progressive Pan-African that was able to seize power in 1983. And his own idea was very simple. It was trying to bring back this, what I call the African Renaissance of how things should be run. And it started, of course, by changing the name of the country from then Upper Volta to what today we know as Burkina Faso, which is the land of the upright. Unfortunately, he was not able to execute so many of his political, economic, and other plans. It lasted for just 4 years. In 1987, his closest ally, of course, in Blaise Compaoré, was very instrumental to his demise. Now, that is just one example. But before then, in 1961, Africa witnessed a very bloody takeover when, of course, we lost Patrice Emery Lumumba in the Congo. That was a man also that was very progressive. That was the first time Africans really knew that we were in trouble. And again, since then, Congo has never remained the same, even in 2020 as we speak. We also had that in 1963 in Togo with Sylvanus Olympio. We've had that in so many other countries, even including the Central African Republic with David Deco. And of course, which brought the government of course, the man that calls himself the general in the Central African Republic. His name is Bokassa. So yes, we've had so many strong, resilient African freedom fighters that genuinely have been able to at least make efforts towards the emancipation of Africa politically and economically. But again, they've always been pulled down, and these are the figures you are talking about. In Ghana in 1963, precisely in August, we saw what happened with Kwame Nkrumah, of course. He was already in Beijing on his way to Hanoi in Vietnam to reconcile the Vietnamese and the Americans at the time during the Vietnamese War. Of course, he was overthrown even before he was even able to know what was happening. So his reign lasted for only between 1957 and 1966, which was just, let me say, 9 years. And that, of course, explains a lot about Africa. And Ghana has never been the same since 1966. So yes, unfortunately, Africa has found itself in this quagmire. But again, in the 21st century, we are hoping that we are going to silence the guns. We are hoping that moving forward, these incidences, these incidents and these situations are not going to happen again. We have, at least in South Africa, Julius Malema, a strong voice. He has our support. And the good thing is that he's hale and healthy. He's very vibrant. And we hope that we can all come together to preserve his life. And his one voice is that, at least so far, has given Africa hope that, yes, our figures can live, our figures can survive, and again, they can help fight the cause of African unity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Okeke. And I would like us to look at this, Mr. Debo. How can Africans and Africa at large deliver itself from self-sabotage and grievous predicaments? Because it's like our history has been truncated with events that I want to call self-caused. I want to put it that way, that everything that has happened to Africa, from slavery to colonialism, it happened with our permission. Not like, I'm not saying all of us did that, but some of us at one point in time sold our brothers to slavery. And when it came to colonialism, while others were resisting colonial rule, others were supporting, fighting alongside the colonialists to suppress colonial resistances. We can think of the, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not a good historian, like the Mao Mao resistance and other resistances across Africa. How can we free ourselves from happening again? Because it's like it's happening in the 21st century with everything that is happening with African Development Bank and the former ambassador to the UN and so on. It's like Africans are, in fact, the assassination of Gaddafi, Africans at the AU were in support of the invasion of Libya and other African countries. What do we need to do to free ourselves from this?
Thank you. There is a great Pan-Africanist, Chinua Achebe, an author, said something. He said, until the lion hires his own storyteller, the story of the hunt will always favor the hunter. What does this actually mean? Think about it. Until we as Africans begin to tell our own story, then the story will be told for us. If we don't tell our own stories, then these stories, some of which we referred to, would actually reflect the thinking of external parties. When you say, for example, that there's a lot of self-sabotage and what have you, whilst that is true, that same self-sabotage is true of all other cultures. In the West, here in the East, pretty much across board. Now, not to excuse it, but the point is that you have to understand your own history, and you also have to be able to tell your own stories. Because when you're able to tell your own stories and tell of your own history, then you realize that certain things are always with context. So, for example, a lot of us as Africans celebrate Nelson Mandela, which he should be celebrated for, by the way. But I would say, I dare say, many of us celebrate him because this is what other cultures have said we should do. There are many Africans whose stories have not yet been told and may never be told because we don't take the time to understand our own history, or we actually have not been able to get knowledge across to people in such a way that they are able to consume that. I give a quick example. Recently, and just prior to COVID-19, a gentleman called Joseph Edgar developed a play. Joseph Edgar is actually an investment banker by profession, and he decided to go into theater production. And by going into theater production, he now began to tell stories of different peoples and different Africans. And by listening to some of those stories, people now began to understand what the context of which different Africans did different things. Still talking theater, I remember a few years ago in New York, I went to see, well, in the US, there was a Broadway show for Fela, the African musician. And prior to then, there are lots of things that I did not know about his life, even though I thought I did. But because his story had not been told in such a way that I knew about or I had information about, it was difficult to relate with specific things. And in the same way, this theater production that I just spoke about was titled Aremu. And basically, it talked about another Pan-African that maybe some people don't even know about. The key thing again is there's nothing new under the sun. And we also need to understand our own history and our own context. Some people do not know, for example, that before any Western country developed streetlights, the Benin Empire in West Africa had developed streetlights from palm oil almost, I don't know, 1,000 years ago or something like that. The longest man-made wall today is not the Great Wall of China, but it's actually of that same empire. And their wall is 4 times longer than the Chinese wall, the Great Wall. So you see, there are lots of things that we actually need to know about our own history. Because, you know, well, Bob Marley joked, well, it was a song, but really, it's true. If you know your history, you will know where you're coming from. And so when people provide false negatives, you're also able to push back. There was a gentleman from a particular country who was talking about something, and he said, in your country, you do this, 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 and this. Unfortunately for him, I had also been to his country. And I said, yeah, it's probably true. However, it's no different from yours, where in your place, in this location, you do this, this, and this. And then the guy thought and said, well, it's true. We're probably not different after all. And that is the importance of information. We ourselves need to make sure that we begin to tell our stories right, and we begin to provide context for these stories, and not accepting that we're bad or we have had issues. Yes, everybody has had. We're no different from anyone else, and that is a fact.
Well, thank you, sir. I think what I got from this and what others, the other participant got is, let's tell our own stories. Because one thing I've realized is our movie storytellers, be it in the movie domain or historians or writers, they always try to sit back and write stories based on love, religion, and try to fix the colonial history. Rather than calling it the invasion of Africa, they fix it to call it the scramble for Africa and so whatnot. And even the movies we have about the life of Nelson Mandela, the life of Idi Amin Dada, and all other great Africans were written by Americans, by British. And these guys, the actors, most of the actors were actually those who grew up in America, who got to study this about these great men from books written by the foreigners. Now, I begin to ask myself, can these stories ever give you a true picture of who Mandela is, or who Mandela was, who Nkrumah was? Because let's not forget, the idea of writing is a good story or scripting, making a good movie, is to hit the box office as hard as possible, and they have been succeeding. So I want to believe it's time for Africans to tell its own stories, be it good or bad. Let's be the first people to break out the stories. And with this, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give the floor some few minutes, let the audience give us an input of what they think, what they've gathered from every minute of discussion we have had so far. Please, the floor is, if you have anything to contribute, just do so by raising a hand. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is our opportunity to contribute. Okay, I've seen a hand raised. Okay, you can unmute yourself. I'm a Dr. Mr. Gafa Karimu. Mr. Gafa, okay, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much for this discussion. For me, it's like, I just have one question actually for the panelists. Since we are talking about African unity, my question is like, what strategy can we put in place to achieve the unity? Is it like through rediscovering our history or our culture, or is it through trade, like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that we are having right now in Africa? So how are we going to achieve this unity in Africa? And this is my question. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I would like to direct that question to Mr. Charles Okenke, please. What should be done to achieve this set unity?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gaffer and moderator. Thank you. I think the model that was introduced by Kwame Nkrumah in 1963 in Addis Ababa is still very, very well and alive, in my own opinion. I think we've not, as Africans, been able to experiment on that model. And I think for me, that is one thing we should go back to, again, talking about our own renaissance. Nkrumah was very clear, not only in his words, but also in his actions, at least if you go to Ghana. And what he was saying is that Africa needs to understand that the entire 54 countries that we have today, or perhaps 55, if you think that Western Sahara is a sovereign nation, were created by Western powers. And by that mindset, we should understand that the whole essence was for exploitation, okay? To take our resources for the improvement, for the betterment of other civilizations other than our own civilization. So Nkrumah said that one, Africans must understand that going forward, that we must make sure that the artificial boundaries that we have, okay, only exist on paper, but in the real time, we have to integrate to make those borders irrelevant. And by integrating means that one, we must have one army, which is one military force, one customs, which is what I'm going to get into perhaps if we have to talk about African free trade, one currency, he talked about this, and even interestingly, one government. But again, this one government might sound very ambiguous because it takes a lot of explaining to do in terms of its complexities, and again, how to work out one government in Africa. But it is very simple. The Nkrumah model is very well and alive, in my opinion. And I think Africans should always remember that model and go back to it. One, we must realize that we have to eliminate completely what we are looking at now as our own borders that were not created by Africans, that were not created with our own consent. We were not asked if we wanted that or we did not, okay? The Europeans came and they created all of this. So in our minds, we must understand that, eliminate all artificial borders, okay? Perhaps not in the literal sense, okay? But in action. And that means that we must have free movement of people, or free movement of human capital, if you may, free movement of resources, among other things, of course, which is what the African continental free trade is all about. So it's very important for me, for us to go back to the Nkrumah model, okay? And Nkrumah was very, very plain and simple, that Africans must understand that we were artificially created, and we must eliminate all forms of such creation that has led to, of course, what he described as neo-colonialism, neo-imperialism. So the Nkrumah model for me is perfect going forward.
Okay, let me try to redirect the question to Mr. Debo. If we look at from the Nkrumah model device Mr. Okeke just described, we realize that some African countries, for example, CEMAC within the Central African Economic Region, the economic bloc, we have the ECOWAS. They have been trying to implement this model for quite some time now. I will take, for example, CEMAC, which I'm very familiar with. We try to build up free trade zones where people could move across the border from Cameroon to Equatorial Guinea to Gabon and Congo and do trade freely without any obstruction. But Equatorial Guinea, Gabon did not. The basic argument was, politicians, please, not the citizens, I'm not saying this, the politicians said, the basic argument was, the Cameroonians are leaving their country, which is poor and with no money, since the politicians have embezzled, to come to Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, where there is oil money to come and somewhat prevent them from getting this money. And it led to serious tension, which is still going on today. And the president of the country had to ship out Cameroonians. So if we look at this event, and it has happened in a lot of other African countries. So if you look at this event, is that model, can we really achieve that model?
Thank you. You know, as I started with at the beginning of the discussion, sometimes with different models, you now begin to look at the practicality of actually achieving those things. And realistically, one of the things that you realize is that you have to build layer by layer, as against trying to build it all up at once. One of the things I admire here in China is the ability to reverse engineer or deconstruct stages of particular things. And so in terms of engineering, say maybe the ability to build railways, they've deconstructed and reversed engineered the steps to be taken. Americans as well have also found a way to deconstruct the elements that are needed to build and grow a business. And why am I saying this? I believe that for us to have African unity, we need to be able to look around us today to collaborate so that we can compete. And by collaborating, it means let's look around for models that actually work and then layer by layer, build what we intend to build by collaborating with many others. Using the CEMAC example or ECOWAS or SADC, SADC regions and the various regions, you realize that what everybody is trying to do is to protect what they currently have. So we're all looking at, this is where we are, let us protect what we currently have. However, what if there was a way to actually show that beyond this particular point of where we are, there's actually this and this and this and this. So if you can show that there's actually even more that can come in, then those who are fighting at this level become irrelevant. And then you now begin to show that, okay, well, there is more for the entirety of all of us. So again, these are models, but I keep saying that for us to be able to achieve unity, the very first layer, somewhat, needs to be the ability for us to actually trade with each other. When we trade with each other, we begin to now have economies of scale. So some countries would be able to better produce specific products. Now, the workability and all what have you of that requires some thinking. But the thing is, once you begin to integrate and once you begin to work with one another, it's inevitable that you now begin to have this unity. So if you have as a goal development of the well-being of the people from each country, then you will look beyond the individual intricacies. Sometimes some of these cases are a bit laughable. Forgive me if I use the word laughable, because so on a per capita basis, for Cameroon, I believe the per capita income is about $1,300. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it is about that range. Average per capita income is about $1,300. For Gabon, which quote unquote says that they are going to come and steal our money, the per capita income is about $1,800. So what realistically is the difference between a country where the per capita income is 1,300 and a country where the per capita income is 1,800? And then you compare that to another country where the per capita income is, say, $15,000 or $30,000 or $40,000. So you begin to realize that some of the things that we are quote unquote fighting about are actually irrelevant. And why I said sometimes laughable. If we as people can actually show that, look, there are opportunities for us working together and there is development to be had for having each other's backs, then we begin to work towards achieving unity. I'm not necessarily one for models because I believe that these models change over time and times continue to evolve and change. It's good to have a framework. So I'm not averse to an increment model. I understand that things like having, from a conceptual basis, having one border, having one army, having one government will be almost impossible to implement today. But the framework of the ability of people to move from country to country, the framework of the ability for people to defend each other is very important. especially when you recognize that we are dealing with forces that are external. I use an example of what happened in Gambia a few years ago. An election was held in Gambia, and the president at the time, the sitting president, lost the election, and he agreed to step down for the incoming person. However, the incoming person came out and started making some statements that were against external forces or external governments, and not in those governments' interests. And those external governments were now able to convince the guy who had already lost the election and who had even declared publicly that he was going to step down, that he was going to stay. And suddenly, it was clear that what had happened in Côte d'Ivoire could have happened again, especially as one of the foreign governments was even saying that they were going to send fighter jets to support the person that had said was going to step down so that he could stay in power and protect their interests. But what happened? One particular country had grown, or one particular West African country had developed its economy, even though this country is not where it ought to be, but it has even developed its own economy and its own defense to a specific point. And I remember the statement. It said to this European superpower, we agree that you are a superpower, but we're much closer to these guys than you are. For every one fighter jet that you send, we'll send 3. What happened? The superpower, European superpower, backed down. And when this former president saw that the source of his strength was taken away, he agreed to some kind of extradition treaty. I've tried very hard not to call the countries, but everybody here probably knows who and what I'm referring to at every point. So the key thing is, in terms of unity, we need to recognize that there are external powers, but we need to find a way to make sure that, and I say again, that we collaborate in order to compete. Sometimes, even your enemy, collaborate with them to achieve what it is that you want to do. And based on that, adapt and adopt their best practices. Learn from them. Use what they have used in order to get to where they are. And based on that, you yourself also grow. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have another hand. I'll call on Teddy.
Okay, please, Mr. Moderator, can I just chip in something very important?
Okay, yes, Mr. Charles.
Yeah, thank you. It's just to, again, buttress Mr. Debo's submission. And again, in the context of SADC, ECOWAS, and CEMAC, and the rest of them. The apprehension is this. You talked about Cameroonians moving to Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and what have you. It is very simple to understand why the Gabonese perhaps are not too welcoming of the Cameroonians. Now, there's this thing we call fear, or perhaps what some might describe as hysteria. Now, they think that they might potentially lose their jobs. They think they might potentially lose their businesses. That is what they are very concerned about, not about the GDP per capita or their PPP, their purchasing power parity, but they just don't want to lose their jobs and they don't want to lose their businesses to people they think potentially are going to ask for lesser pay than the indigenous people would. So that is one apprehension. Then secondly, there's this thing we call nationalism, okay, which I'm not a big fan of because it always leads to chauvinism. That is overzealousness in patriotism. People always believe that I am from this part of the world and this is whom I am, and I don't want to accept any other person because I think I'm superior to that person. That is what nationalism does to your mind. It makes you think that as a Gabonese, you are superior to a Cameroonian, and for that reason, you don't want to mingle or integrate with this Cameroonian. So going forward in the 21st century, we Africans must understand that there's absolutely no difference between a Gabonese and a Cameroonian, at least looking at our physical features. Okay, if you go to Gabon today and myself as an Igbo man meet you in Gabon, I will automatically think that you're a Gabonese, even before you make any introduction. So we have to break that mindset of nationalism, patriotism in Africa going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's call on Teddy.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Mr.
I also want to say a very big thank you to our speakers, Mr. Debo and Mr. Okeke. Thanks so very much for. I think it's been quite insightful. I've tried to, in the course of your, in the course of the interaction, I've tried to pick out the how. We seem to talk about the what. Like, okay, this is the problem, and I think it was when Gafar asked the question. He just asked us the question. So what do we do? Like, how do we go about this? So, because similar to what we have back home, there's always this tendency to just set up committees, talk about these, or have so many people in our parliament, to have so many people in the Senate, and we do a lot of brainstorming and talking. But when it gets to the point of implementation, then it's like, I don't know if it would be okay to say we just develop this code feed. So that is one. Then two is to this question, though it's simple, but I think I'll just need an answer here. Are we really ready? I mean, are we really ready to play on the global space? On the global platform? Are we really ready as a people, as a continent? Are we ready? Then three, Mr. Debo talked about trade. Even though that is true, but I think that our people, I think that the problem is more of political, or what you might want to say, you might want to call leadership driven, because it is our policies that drive trade. It's our policies that drive the economy. It's our policies that drive a lot of these things. So, in as much as, okay, let me just take a detour here. For example, this Black Lives Matter, the whole American saga, blah blah blah. And I was discussing with someone, and the person was talking about why should these other people, why should the whites do this to the blacks? And the blacks have this ideology of this entitlement mentality, this victimhood mindset that, oh, these things are always happening to us, these things are always happening to us. And I asked the person this question, and I said, back in, okay, I'm a Nigerian for those of us, for the rest of the audience. And I asked the person the question, and I said, are you telling me now that back home in Lagos, we don't have police killing our own people? We also have police killing our own people. So this is not a case of blacks against blacks. So I'm asking this question because so that we don't push it to say, okay, this other set of people should do this for us, this other set of people should do this for us. So first is the question, are we really ready for this transformation? And two, if we are ready with the crop of leaders, political leaders we have now, do you think these ideas that you have laid before us today, do you think they will see the light of the day? Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, I would like to direct that question to Mr. Debo, please. Could you throw some light on that?
Sure. Thank you, Teddy, for the question. You asked, I think, about 7 questions in 3. But I will attempt to answer them. Are we ready? No. However, as with all cultures, you're never truly ready. You're just ready enough. And as you will see, once you go through history across multiple cultures, it's just a fraction of the people. Sometimes it's even one person that starts a movement that changes things. So I can answer immediately, is the general national average African ready for unity? No. Sorry, I'm being blunt. No. But can we change things? Yes. Are the governments, the way they are structured today, can they actually help to change things and all that? No. However, what is happening today, as you see I use the bad side as an example of what can happen on the good side. Before now, when there were terror attacks or bad things happening, you could always attach it to nation states, country by country basis. What is happening is that a lot of the negative organizations now are simply that, organizations, groupings of people across borders that are able to achieve things. I use the example of a bad to cross over to the good. Essentially, what you can have today is that, and what you see, even here in China, where the Communist Party is the leading party, you realize that growth is private sector led. And what then happens is that governments now catch up or attempt to now create policies to help catch up with those things. Good example, I don't know if it's a good example, but you have technologies like blockchain, you have technologies like social media, and now people are now trying to get to the point where, or governments are now trying to get to the point where, how can this be regulated so that it's for the good of people and all that. My point is that in the current age, we don't necessarily have to rely on governments leading everything anymore. Today, you can actually have private sector led or people led movements. You mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement. Whether you support it or don't support it, the fact is it is a movement and it is not government led. So, key thing in answering or coming back to your question, are people ready? No. Can something be done about it? Yes. Why? Because it is for our collective good. Are governments ready? No. But can something be done? Yes. Why? Because in the present age, we have the technology to actually leverage getting people together. For example, all of us are on this call today, and we have the opportunity to dial in from different parts of wherever we are. This was impossible years ago. Now, in terms of government, my great-grandfather complained about government. My grandfather complained about government. My father complained about government. My generation is also complaining about government. When are we going to stop being a victim and actually taking actions that will change things? The truth is, we need to draw a line in the sand at a point in time and take responsibility of our own destinies. And as we take responsibility of our own destinies, we do the same for others as well. This is my point of view. And I hope I've been able to answer Teddy, even though I was being a bit blunt.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I think you touched quite some pertinent points there. Well, Mr. Charles Okeke, I would like to take us back a little bit to the concept of Pan-Africanism and African unity. Because at one point, even myself, I get confused if we are talking, when we talk of Pan-Africanism, are we talking of African unity and vice versa? Please, I would like you to, because this is your area of specialty, and I would like you to try to throw some light on if there is a connection or a nexus between the concept of Pan-Africanism and African unity.
Okay, all right then. Thank you very much. It's important for us to understand that these two concepts are the same coin, or perhaps what I would say are two sides. You know what I mean? You cannot separate Pan-Africanism from African unity. And what that means is that if you try to describe Pan-Africanism, you start with Pan. And what is Pan? Pan means all. Okay, and by the concept of all, we mean all African people. And by African people, we don't just mean people in the mainland. Those of us in the mainland, and of course, those in the diaspora. So you cannot separate Pan-Africanism from African unity. But again, one has been able to influence the other. Pan-Africanism, which of course, interestingly, did not start in Africa, started in the diaspora, in the Americas, so to say. I wouldn't like to specifically say in the US, because I always argue that the US only had 10% of the slaves that left the shores of Africa. 90% of them were in the Caribbean. So Pan-Africanism and the old concept, of course, with Garvey being a Jamaican, at the time was living in the US, was a concept that helped to engineer people like Kwame Nkrumah, people like Jomo Kenyatta, people like Kenneth Kaunda, people like Julius Nyerere in Nigeria, of course, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, and a few other Pan-Africanists at the time that were able to study in the US. So the first concept that led to African unity was Pan-Africanism. You know, these young African scholars that went to the US, that went to study in other civilizations, understood the need for all Pan-Africans to come together as one, and now brought that concept back home to the continent, where they began to galvanize this liberation movement and what have you, which of course gave rise to African unity. So again, it is Pan-Africanism which gave birth to African unity, but you cannot separate both because they continue to reoccur at the same time. You cannot talk about African people only in the continent without, of course, knowing and be conscious that we also have African people outside of the continent. So our unity is not limited to those of us in the continent. Mm-hmm. By extension, it has to do with the 100 million African people in Brazil today, for example, the 35, 40,000 African people in India today, for example, of course, the 25 to 30,000 African people in Australia today, for example. So if we talk about unity, we can also draw strength from these our other brothers and sisters in the diaspora, okay? And that has to do with Pan-Africanism and African unity. So you find out that there's this nexus, there's this common denominator that has been able to bring these two concepts together. So you cannot separate Pan-Africanism from African unity. And it's very important for me to state this before I hand over to you. To a non-African or to a non-Black person, there's no such thing as a Nigerian or a Cameroonian or a Ghanaian. When they see you outside of the shores of Africa, the first thing that comes to their mind is that you're an African. There's nobody that is going to look at you at the first instance and say, Jackson, you're from Cameroon. No. And why? Because of your physical characteristics, because of your melanin, because of the way you look. You understand? So if you think that you're a Black man in Brazil, for example, and you have nothing to do with the continent of Africa, I'm sorry to tell you this. If you leave Brazil and go to, say, Australia, the first thing that they're going to think of you is that you're an African, because why? You look like an African. And that is, again, the whole essence of unity. So Pan-Africanism, African unity cannot be separated. These are, like, again, as I said, one coin of two faces, and they work together. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think I can confidently summarize that Pan-Africanism and African unity can simply boil down to Africanism. Be you in the Caribbean, absolutely, be you in Africa, be you in Australia, it's all absolutely about Africanism. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
For us to proceed now, since we've gotten a clear connection between Pan-Africanism and African unity, I would like us to look at, when we talk about African unity, some people claim that colonial ties and allegiance to foreign nations and corporations threaten this dream. Well, it's quite somewhat true. For example, I will come back to Cameroon. For the last 4 years, also, Cameroon has been in a series of what I would term civil war or something like that, where the English faction of the country wants independence and innocent people are continually being killed with no remorse. And this simply boils down to the issue of the ties with the Europeans. Now, other countries as well have colonial masters. And before independence, in fact, if not all, most African countries had to pen down treaties with these colonialists. And some of these treaties, for example, for the French countries, warrant that they pay a colonial tax, even when these people did not spend a dime in this country, but right up to the 21st century, we are still paying colonial tax, right? And all this put together is somewhat difficult for each country to manage the limited resources that they get at the end of the day after paying all the duties and whatnot to the colonial masters. Now, for you, Mr. Debo, what is your view on this claim? Is African unity or Pan-Africanism hindered by colonial ties? And whether true or not, could African financial independence give Africans the ability or foster this spirit of Pan-Africanism and African unity?
Thank you for the question. It strikes me as very odd that, let's put things in context. And I mention France not because I'm trying to isolate them, but just to put things in context. I have a lot of French friends, and they're actually not even aware of some of these things. So France today is a country in the EU and does not use the previous currency which it used, the French francs. However, it has convinced certain countries that were previously, or that it previously colonized, that their reserves should be kept in French francs and kept with them for safekeeping and for stability. Sorry, Jackson, you're laughing. I've not said anything yet. And the very first time I heard this, I thought it was absurd. And I tried to investigate, so why are countries still sticking to this arrangement? And as much as we can debate it here and there, the fact still remains that there are very strong ties to the colonial leaders or the colonial construct on the continent today. And when I say strong, very, very strong. This tie today is no longer political. Today, these ties are purely economic, almost 100% economic. If you deduce from this, that means that if we as Africans want to achieve good things or betterment for ourselves, then maybe in copying from other places, what we need to focus on initially, and again, it's never one thing. I say this with a clause, it's multiple things. But then it might be right to focus on economic emancipation. And by economic emancipation, it means how do we create a community, or how do we create a system where there are opportunities for economic growth and well-being of not just one person, but for a collective number of people. And who has done such things around us? If you reflect, so I guess I've answered part one of that question of, does economic emancipation matter? To my mind, yes, it does, because it provides a foundation of many things. If we use China as an example, and I like to from time to time, even though, you may or may not disagree with their own structure, but there are always certain things you can learn from other cultures. By focusing, first of all, on an economic base, after getting to a certain level of that economic growth, they've now been able to go back to build also a cultural element on top of that economic base. Some of the other countries that have done this rapid growth in recent times, another one is Singapore, that has been able to, in fact, their leader wrote the book From Third World to First. Lee Kuan Yew, yes. From Third World to First. And it's an amazing book, and it tells you stories that we as Africans probably also need to develop. You would see from his book and several others that I have read in several other countries, including Indonesia as well, that because, and it's the same thing with a business, if you're starting a business, there's so many things to do. So the ideal thing is, first of all, to focus on a small set of things. I believe that a small set of things that we need to begin to focus on are economic indicators and economic things that provide better well-being. Look, if you are able to create, and I use this across the African continent, generally speaking, today's data says that there are 1 million businesses being registered in Africa every year. Currently, it is at the fastest pace that it has ever been, which on the one hand is good. Most of these businesses are survivalist businesses. Maybe 80% of them is just one-man business and all that. But just think about it. If there are 100,000 businesses in Africa that can employ, say, 10,000 people, right? That number comes to, give or take, I believe, if my math is correct, 100 million. And we know that in Africa, on average, each job supports 5 people. If you have 100 million people actively engaged from businesses that have been created and that are growing, and they support 5 people, that's already 500 million people. And if you think about it conceptually, this is how China was able to move 500 million people from poverty to middle income. So what are the lessons that you can actually learn from that? We need to begin to invest in our own, or follow the models. Remember I said collaborate and compete. Follow the models that others have actually used to build businesses, to build economic capacity. My brother, Mr. Okeke, said earlier about the diaspora. The diaspora is very, very fundamental in the growth of Africa, because there's a friend of mine who said it jokingly, but it is true. If you live in some countries, let's say China, you are living in the future. You have seen how a metro system looks like. You have seen how to order for food via an app. You have already seen it. So if you go back home, for example, and say this is possible, whilst the person back home may have no idea of how that thing looks like, you have, beyond having an idea, you have seen it work. So you can actually duplicate that thing back home. I say this because what we need to do, and this goes back to Teddy's, is on the one hand, we need to invest and build businesses that are Pan-African. So don't just think of building a business that is only going to work in Cameroon. Build a business. Singapore, as we use the example of, is a relatively small country. Population is very small, size very small. It's a city-state, and they say city-state because it's really the size of a city. It's very small population. But what it was able to do was to build businesses that cut across countries. And for us as Africans, what do we need to do? We need to begin to build businesses that cut across countries. And by extension, finance businesses that cut across countries. I think one of the reasons that I was invited today is part of the work that I'm doing with that organization called Get Funded Africa. And what we're doing in that organization is to say, hey, look, wherever you are, whatever it is that you're doing, collaborate with local and international investors and build business ideas that can scale. And this is particularly important in the academics as well, because you also need finance and economics to fund your research. The research that you do is critical in accelerating economic growth. If you, for example, find a cure to the COVID-19 virus today, that is an economic boom for whichever country does that. Even if they say it is going to be given out for free initially, many companies will still pay licenses 10 years from now, 20 years from now, to provide generic drugs from that discovery, even if it is given for free today. So I'm trying to use examples of what we need to really be focusing on. If you're researching today, does your research today have, even if it is a niche area or a niche idea, can it actually impact other areas, and can it be Pan-African? And this, I believe, is what we need to do. We need to build models and finance models that are Pan-African and go beyond just one country. In Singapore, or even in the US, in Silicon Valley, one of the questions they will ask is this model scalable? And scalability means, can I take this model from Kenya and adopt it in Ghana? Can I take it from Ghana and adopt it in Ivory Coast? Can I take it from Ivory Coast and adopt it? Of course, each market is different. You need to change a few things here and there, but in terms of concept, can you move it around? And this, I believe, is why it is important for us to focus on that ability to discover something that works across multiple countries in Africa. Sorry, if you leave me, I can talk for too long, but I think I'll just stop there.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, Mr. Okeke, let me try to rephrase this question a little bit. Now, Mr. Debo has talked of that it's possible that economic independence can actually be achieved in Africa, right? And economic independence is the way forward for our unity. Because if we are actually independent economically, there are a lot of things, and he went ahead to highlight different options or different routes through which we could achieve that. But again, the question I want you to answer for us now is, looking at the ties from your point of view as a political analyst and as a legal-minded individual, is it possible for us to break these ties with these colonialists? And if so, how do we go about achieving this complete economic independence? Because to some of us, it's like we need a third world war that should happen and everything burn to the ground so that all of us start from scratch before we could achieve such an independence.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'm going to make reference very quickly to this book, which I guess most of us might have read or perhaps heard of. It was published in 1963, of course, by Kwame Nkrumah. known as neo-colonialism, the last phase of imperialism. And what was it trying to talk about? Is very relevant and resonates with your question. How do we break these ties, okay, with our erstwhile colonialists? And what Nkrumah was saying was very simple, that for us to break those ties, we must look inwards. And by looking inwards means we have to solidify ourselves and make sure that we do not have any reasons whatsoever, politically, culturally, economically, whatever it is, to go back to those erstwhile colonialists. And how do we do that? Is that we must fortify, we must strengthen ourselves as one unit going forward. So Nkrumah was very clear, okay? If we do not work as a unit, if we go as Nigeria, if we go as Cameroon, if we go as Ghana, if we go as Zimbabwe, against these guys, we do not have a very good chance. The odds are against us. But as a unit, 54, 55 that we are today, we can forcefully push our own agenda and try to break away from this group of people that you made mention of. So yes, it is very possible to break these ties, but you cannot break these ties individually. If you look at again, Mr. Debo made mention of something. The richest economy in Africa today is that of Nigeria. And you might ask, what is the GDP of Nigeria, for example? The GDP of Nigeria, for example, is perhaps what, let me say, Shell Petroleum, makes in 1 year, just doing business in Nigeria, in Algeria, and of course, in Gabon. So we cannot break economic ties from a country like Britain that controls Shell Petroleum if we go as Nigeria. But again, if we go in the context of AU, then we're talking about 1.2 billion people and a GDP of $3.2 trillion. Then we can forcefully push an agenda that might make some element of sense going forward. So to break ties from this group of new colonizers, Africa needs to work as a unit. We cannot go it individually. China, again, as we all know, is $11–12 trillion economy. The US, of course, is 17. It will not make any sense for a country like Nigeria or Nigeria and South Africa put together going against China. And that is why they have FOCAC. And FOCAC is the Forum of China-African Cooperation, and that is bringing 54 countries with their entire resources against one country. But again, that is the only way we can make sense going forward. So yes, we can break these ties, but we can only break it as a unit, as one Africa, as a united Africa. But as individual countries, I'm very sorry to say we're going to struggle. And if you look at the 14 countries today that use the CFA franc that is being printed in Lyon, in France, you understand that they struggle, okay? Because the GDP of these 14 countries put together is still a joke, okay, to the GDP of France that is $5–6 trillion. And predominantly, why is it so? Because France every year makes half a trillion from the reserves of these countries, and that continues to strengthen the economy of France. But these 14 countries can only succeed in pushing away France if they merge with the greater Africa, if they merge with the AU, if they merge with the rest 42 countries, 43 countries, if I'm not mistaken, to form a bloc and go against France. That is the only way I think that they can break away from the shackles of this new colonialism, new imperialism. Thank you.
So if I may, just to add to what Mr. Okeke said, I also think that we need to be very smart about quote unquote breaking away. I've used the word collaborate to compete many times, and even working with your enemy. Because if you take China, for example, China will not overtly go one-on-one or fight with the US, even though it's expected to overtake the US in terms of economic power at some point. Why? Because there are a lot of resources that the US has at its disposal to cause issues and destabilize many countries. Zimbabwe is a case in point where we've seen just trying to blow everything up and cause issues. Longer term, causes issues locally. So I mentioned this because we now need to actually be smart. Find ways to work with even these people and then gradually understand and then decouple. So rather than trying to look for a way to fight and blow things up, one should actually instead focus on a decoupling. And that way, you actually get to achieve what you want and without, loss of lives and as using the other word, blowing things up.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. And I just have a very brief question before we we give the floor to the audience.
There's also a question in the group. I think somebody asked a question, if you can see the chat.
Yeah, I've seen. Let me ask a quick question before we get to that question. You made mention, Mr. Okeke, you made mention of the African bloc that does trade with China, right?
Yes.
And you spoke about it like a very positive move towards financial emancipation. And Mr. Debo also supported that fact that it is, in fact, the only way forward for economic emancipation. Africa must come together as a bloc to debate on whatever platform or stage we are going against. Now,
not necessarily, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, sorry if I got you wrongly, but generally the idea is about us coming together if we want to achieve that economic freedom. Right? Now, I want to ask, the present atmosphere from the West and other countries, and Africa included, some African countries, I don't know, or maybe just the local citizens, we see the collaboration between Africa and China as another form of colonialism. I don't know if I should call it propaganda from the West shows that Africa is actually being recolonized by the Chinese rather than actually achieving some sort of a win-win relationship. What do you have to say about that, Mr. Okeke?
Well, I did a full chapter on that issue, the win-win, which perhaps some might describe as a zero-sum game, which is of course the opposite of win-win. If you talk about the game theory, at the moment, what we have is not yet a win-win, and I was very categorical when I dealt on that issue. What we have now is not a trade. It looks more like a raid. And what do I mean by that? I made mention of the Angolan model in my book, and I said what is obtainable in Angola between the Chinese and the government or the people of Angola is a total raid. A transaction that looks like what to call a rent economy kind of transaction. By rent economy, I mean that you don't own anything. I own what you have, and you end up paying me. And that is what happened in Angola, in what I described as the Angola model. So the rent economy model is what the Chinese have been pushing in Africa, unfortunately, as against the Chinese narrative of win-win. So right now, that is not the case. But again, I'm not going to squarely put the entire blame on China or the Chinese government, and I'll tell you why. Now, when you want to engage in business, there's what we call leverage. Now, what is our leverage? Our leverage is that we have the resources, and China needs those resources. So how do we now capitalize on those resources to be able to make fair deals, to be able to make fair bargains? That is the ability of our policymakers, our so-called politicians, to be able to be bold enough to the Chinese and say, yes, we want your $60 billion in loan, again, but on very fair terms, not on a rate disguised as trade kind of terms, or this, what I described again as the rent money or the rent economy kind of business. We must be able to tell the Chinese people that we have something that they need and something that they cannot do without. Now we talk about moving to 5G. It's very important for us to understand the ingredients of the 5G, okay? Now it is technology, but again, these technologies are made up of real raw materials, and these raw materials are gotten from Africa. I could give you names. So Africa is in a fantastic position, but unfortunately, we have not come to that realization. We do not know that. And that is why our policymakers come to Beijing, take 60 billion, go back to Africa and distribute this money and everything is okay. So it is not win-win yet. The Chinese know what they are doing. The Chinese are playing on the psyche of the African people because they know that we have not understood the game in the 21st century. And that is what young people like us should be thinking about, how to be able to confront the Chinese people and tell them that, wait a minute, this is not win-win. This is a zero-sum game. Okay? It is not win-win, not even remotely. And again, I made mention of Angola. That is just one example. Kenya is another example. Zambia is another example. Mozambique is another example. The Gambia is another example, which of course just recently had their first real relationship with China. So it is not yet win-win. Okay? African leaders might be thinking that, okay, it's always a jamboree coming to Beijing every 2 years and collecting $60 billion. It does not make sense in any form or shape. Okay? We must be able to confront the Chinese, letting them understand that we have something that is so valuable to them, not only again to the Chinese, to every other civilization. That is our leverage. And we must recognize that. And as young people in the 21st century going forward, each time we want to engage in this kind of discussions, we must let them understand that they are not doing us any favors. There's never a free lunch, not even in Freetown. So if the Chinese are coming to us, they must understand that they're coming to us not because they're benevolent, no, but because we have something that they cannot do without. And that is what should always be at the top of the agenda of our African leaders. Unfortunately, we don't have a Chinese policy as against the Chinese African policy. So Africans should begin to think in this direction. We must develop a policy for China so that we will be able to address the China problem from the same mindset and with the same agenda. This is very important. And this is part of what we young people should inculcate in our discussions every day, in our daily dialogues with not only the Chinese, but again, just like I said, every other civilizations that has to do with Africa. It's very important for us to begin to restructure our mindsets going forward. Thank you.
Okay, well, it boils down to the policymakers in place and the politicians and the leaders, the governance system that each country has. Now, I want to address this to you, Mr. Dibo. If we are to achieve everything Mr. Okeke just suggested, that we need to build, I don't know, should I say a team that understands what trade, what international trade is all about. A team made up of both scholars and politicians who are to sit together, devise, should I say, inter-country relationship plan. For example, if you want to do trade with China, if you want to do trade with the EU as a whole, or each individual countries in EU, if you want to do trade with America, these are the different rules. These are the different considerations that we have to look at. Now, do you think if the African diaspora sits up and put together documents to address this issue and get to meeting some of these African policymakers in different countries, do you think this can be the way forward for us actually convincing the policymakers back home that, see, we can actually make this a win-win game? if we use this model to do trade with China, America, and this, can we actually get to that point of being able to convince them? Because the entire problem lies with us, those who understand how it works. Like, I think Mr. Okeke has a perfect understanding of this, if I can be permitted to put it in that respect. How do we, led by Mr. Okeke, convince the Nigerian government, convince the Zambian government, the Kenyan government that, see, use this model in doing business with these people?
Thank you. Permit me to actually go back to a comment you made previously before the question. So I'll go back to that comment and then I'll come back to the question. The comment was that it is something that the politicians and the leaders back home need to do some work on. And I actually disagree with that respectfully, because I think that it is something all of us collectively are responsible for. Each and every one of us has a responsibility to speak up and to contribute towards the right thing or getting things done. Having said that, I'll switch back to the question that you asked. In a way, it's related to that comment as well. The question is, what is, or the way I see it is, what is the relationship or what leverage do you currently have today? And what is it that governments are looking out for, or that what is the leverage that you as an individual or I as an individual have in relationship with others? And one of those things is the ability to sit down, to think, to plan, and to communicate. In today's world, we have all these various social media, blah, 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 and all what have you. There are loads of people that now use and leverage social media or blogs or websites to actually influence governments. I use my example. Some time ago, I started writing about why it was important to build industrial parks or economic zones that are focused on specific things. So rather than just having a multitude of economic zones, those things should actually be very focused. You know how it is here in China, you would have an industrial park focused on ceramics, or an industrial park focused on plastics, things like that. It's usually very, very focused. And then I was like, okay, well, we probably need to begin to aggregate some of these industrial parks to get better output, because we have limited resources. So for example, power and electricity is not constant. And so if, rather than trying to provide power across the entire country or in each country, you could actually do what was done in some Asian countries like Indonesia, where they put a priority, and it's not a large priority, maybe 10% priority, on specific locations where they aggregated manufacturing for specific things. And so by doing that, they were able to focus on the key growth drivers and get accelerated growth. This particular example, and why I mentioned this, again relates back to what we said, or to the question directly. What should we be doing? How should we get it done? And how do you actually work with the government or even against the government? I use this example because what then happened was that a few weeks later, someone contacted me asking a few questions. And then later on, they said they were the special assistant to the Minister of Trade and Industries. And then we had a phone call and they're about blah, blah, blah. And later on, there was some back and forth, and they now started implementing it. I'm no one, I'm just an ordinary person, but suddenly, using the tools that we have around today, someone was able to hear our voice, or my voice. And it's the same thing for each one of us. If we take the time to develop a policy, and the diaspora is very important, and develop a think tank, which is why, I was very happy to be invited here and why I said it's a pleasure. The people in this group are essentially a resource. And this think tank can actually be a resource to now start developing models. What is it that Africa should be doing with China? What is it that each individual country should even be doing with each other? I say that because it's not only China. So the most popular one, which we hear about, is the China-Africa, event. Russia has also launched a Russia-Africa event. India has also launched an India-Africa event. Turkey also has a Turkey-Africa event. And the UK also launched a UK-Africa event, especially with Brexit looming. So look, many countries are doing this. Then what stops us from collaborating or collaborating and competing? By that, I mean South Africa. South Africa should also do a South Africa Pali. Nigeria should also do a Nigeria Africa Pali. You see, what this does then is that you don't leave the virgin land for external parties to come in and take over from you. You create the opportunity to collaborate and compete such that when they come, they have to come through you first. In the private sector, I don't know if any of you have heard about Geo. Geo is a telecom network that started from scratch in India. They started a few years ago, I believe 3 years ago, Reliance Jio. So prior to that time, the leading telecom companies in India was Airtel, a few others, forgive me, I can't remember all of them. Jio started from scratch, and within a 3-year period, today, they are now the largest mobile operator in India. They did a few things. They looked at the market and realized not all these people can actually afford smartphones. And so they did something else that was totally different and basically now ensured that almost everybody in India has access to the internet. By creating access to the internet for almost everybody in India, they've created like a first layer. Businesses are now being built. Now, Facebook, through WhatsApp, wanted to come into India. But look, they had already provided something. So they couldn't just come in and take over. They had to come in partnership with the existing ones. If we do not create something that exists, they will take over. And that is a fact. We ourselves need to create something that competes. And then there would now be a basis of collaboration. If we're expecting collaboration when we have not done anything, it's not going to happen. And that collaboration or those things may or may not necessarily be with governments. It is going to be based on what you and I have done. So I keep saying, we tend to usually hands up, say it's the government's fault, finger point. The more we finger point at the government, in fact, if you point to the government, look at it. One finger is pointed to the government, the remaining 4 are pointing back at us. And that is how it is. We have a responsibility and we must play our part in this.
Thank you very much. I would like to move very swiftly down. With the concept of the creation of African Organization of African Unity, which later today known as African Union, and in 2019 we also have the creation of AFCTA, which was about trying to promote intracontinental trade. Could borderless Africa propel unity beyond just trade? If each African countries following the model of African Union, of European Union rather, if we follow that model, could we propel African unity? If yes, what would the political structure, what political structure could we suggest for this model? I'll start with Mr. Okeke. Let's be brief, please. We are catching up with time.
Okay, I think the European Union model, I've always had this argument. It's not quite ideal for Africa for so many reasons. First, you have to understand historically that the EU, of course, was founded in 1993, but again, it has been ongoing, known as the European Commission, long before then. And again, the entire European civilization, in terms of the first industrial revolution, the second industrial revolution, the third industrial revolution, now, of course, the fourth, is way ahead of what we have today in Africa. So I don't think it is adaptable to Africa when we want to make such comparison. Having said that, I think the AU can, of course, design a model that is unique to the African circumstances. If you look at the level of industrialization in Africa today, it is extremely very low, of course, compared to what you have in Europe and EU. And when you talk about the movement of people in EU, you find out that a lot of people travel across countries just for the sake of tourism, for example, but we don't have that in Africa. So people only travel, say, from Nigeria to Cameroon because I have businesses to transact. I'm not going to Cameroons because I want to see the mountains here in the Cameroons. And of course, that also explains the strength of our economy and of course, the strength of the economy of the individual African people. So the EU model is completely not suitable to African situation and circumstances at the moment, and we must recognize that. It's very important. So the AU, I think, has been able to metamorphose, and with Agenda 2063, we are hoping that in the future, Africa will be able to at least gain some sense of economic stability with that agenda. Not that I'm a big fan of Agenda 1963, I mean, Agenda 2063, but again, that is what the AU has been able to prefer to us as Africans. So I generally think that yes, the AU can work, but again, it must recognize that we are different from the EU, and we must look inward to get answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Okeke. I'll direct the last question to Mr. Debo. What challenges do you think await a borderless Africa? Because before we devise any model, we need to look at the challenges and try to reason out solutions before we face them.
Challenges facing a borderless Africa would include a lot of items being imported into the continent through gray markets. Inability of people amongst tribes to, or having enough information about each other, because we don't know enough about each other. Still on challenges, the ability to grow businesses or understanding how to attract investors to businesses. You also have the challenges of infrastructure as a key one in there. Challenges related to governance. The challenges are almost endless if you talk about challenges. The key thing though is that every problem is an opportunity. So if you look at it from that perspective, there are many problems. What that also means is that there are many opportunities for growth.
Thank you very much, distinguished gentlemen and all our participants. It has been a very important day for us. I want to believe we have picked out the core connection between African unity. One cannot exist while the other doesn't. Between African unity and Pan-Africanism. Both are the same coin, but with two faces, like Mr. Okeke said. And from the panel discussion, we have realized that economic emancipation is very vital to African unity and development. But however, we as young people of this generation, of this time, must understand that our participation in this fight is very, very important and necessary. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this session, and we hope that our next session, which will be the part 2, will gather in more people than today. And those who could make it, we say thank you. Those who couldn't, we also say thank you, and we pray that next time you join us. Well, before we drop, I would want to give each speaker, I'll start with Mr. Okeke, 1 minute for a concluding remark.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I don't think we have enough time to take questions from other participants today. That is very unfortunate. I would have wanted us to, of course, take 1 or 2 questions. But again, I don't have such powers. So I'll go straight to the question. When we talk about African unity,
Charles, Mr. Jackson, you could actually engage with the people in the house if they feel they could, and of course the resource persons, if they feel they could spare some more minutes, you may reach a deal, and let's because I can literally feel Mr. Okeke's love to support our people here, do something around the questions that may be on board.
Okay.
So please.
Okay, okay, I will open the floor now to the audience, please.
Yes, but again, there are questions for you. There are questions for you. There are questions already. I don't know if you can see the
chat platform, okay.
Yeah, please. I think out of respect, we might be able to do justice to those questions. True. Yes.
Okay, I think, okay. From Mr. T, he said.
Sorry, Mr. Jackson, you haven't agreed with the people in the house whether they really want to stay.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I will throw I'll try to open the floor to the participant, please. Do we have, can we spare 10 minutes for a question and answer session? Please, let's just type in yes inside the message box, please. Okay, I have 1 yes from Dr. Emmanuel. Okay, I think I will just take that as a positive indication for us to continue. Okay. Okay, I'll go straight to the first question from Mr. T. He says his question is to the resource persons: to what extent will promoting local languages play in bringing African closer? To what extent will promoting local languages contribute in bringing African closer? So I'll open the floor to Mr. Okeke.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. I don't know if that's from Mr. T.
Yes.
Mr. T, I'm going to recommend a book for you. It was a book published in 1986 by a Kenyan author and professor. His name is Ngugi wa Thiong'o. The title of the book was Decolonizing the Mind. And primarily what Ngugi was saying is that there's the need for Africans to begin to promote African linguistics. And that has to do with our Swahilis, our Hausas, our Igbos, our Zulus, our Xhosas, etc. So I would recommend this book to you. It's very important. And Ngugi was very equivocal when he said that for Africa to unite, we must be able to appreciate our own. And what that means is that in our curricula in different countries, we should be able to at least include 2, 3, or 4 of other African languages to help us integrate. We might talk about Swahili, for example, Hausa, perhaps Zulu language to be taught in countries like Cameroon or Nigeria or Zimbabwe. So yes, I think it's very integral and a core part of Africa unity when we begin to look at local languages and how to inculcate them into our education system is really going to help in bringing us closer, because at least if I can speak Swahili, then I can confidently say I want to take a trip to, say, Kenya or Tanzania or even Rwanda, and knowing fully well that I'm not going to struggle with French or any other colonial language for that matter. So yes, I believe that these local languages can help us integrate better.
Thank you. I will direct the next question to Mr. Debo. The question says, how can African youth contribute to the growth of the continent without necessarily being putting up a resistance against the government?
Work in partnership with the government. By working in partnership, either create, think tanks or messages, or even create a business that essentially helps the economy. That way, you're not working against them, but you're working with them.
The next question is, how can we break the visa restrictions within the African countries, which has made the average African not being able to visit or travel across the different countries in the continent? Mr. Okeke.
Okay, I think that is a colonial heritage, unfortunately. I don't think if Africans had their ways, they would have such restrictions. But unfortunately, a country like Nigeria that was colonized by the British made it virtually, if not almost impossible, for somebody from, say, Niger Republic or Republic of Chad, or even Republic of Benin that was colonized by France to have free access to Nigeria. But again, ECOWAS in 1975 was able to break all of that. But again, before 1975, it was impossible. And by extension, that is what Africa is experiencing today. And that is why I will need a visa to go to South Africa, for example. But an European or an American will arrive at South Africa and just make his way through the immigration. So that, to me, is a colonial burden that we bear. And it's very important for us as Africans to look into it, particularly in this 21st century going forward. I'm very grateful that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has decided also beyond just issues of tariffs and non-tariffs to look at the issues of visas, which by extension will help to like easing up, movement of people, of course, movement of capital, and of course, give people the opportunity to have different kind of residency. So if you have a business in Kenya, for example, and you're from Cameroon, by the virtue of that business, you could have your residency in Kenya and become more or less a Kenyan citizen. That is part of what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has been able to piece together. And I think going forward, it's really going to help to eliminate this problem or this burden of visas that has, up to this moment, been a big hindrance to free movement of people, free movement of goods, and of course, free movement of other forms of production. So yes, I think we are going to achieve that, particularly with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Okay, I think we take the last question, which is from Emmanuel. He says, "Is a borderless free Africa possible, most especially in Northern Africa?"
I see no reason why it is not possible. Of course, for borders exist for various reasons, but in terms of for Africa, generally speaking, it would not be borderless in the sense of no borders at all, but it might just be like there's free movement, pass through the relevant requirements, and you're able to move through. So is it possible in terms of free movement? Yes. And I think there was the question primarily before that as to big companies benefit from these regional bodies where they're able to do business across different regions, and how can SMEs break across Africa business-wise and benefits to the market? I think it's really more about looking at what works and leveraging what exists today. So for things like technology, I use the example of, say, maybe TikTok. TikTok the office is here in China, but it is very present in the US, it's very present in different places. Same for Facebook, head office in the US, but it's everywhere. So as young African people as well, maybe what we need to do is also begin to think of businesses and leverage technology to achieve these things. This would be my response to these two questions combined.
Okay, thank you, sir. The floor, is there any question, please?
Yes, I think we have two or three more questions. I would like you to take a look.
Okay, okay.
There are 2 or 3 more questions. Unless, again, if we want to ignore them.
I think we've covered them all, actually.
Yeah,
because I took the last 2 questions.
There's a question that has to do with SMEs, small, medium.
Yeah, that's what I just answered just now.
He answered the
Oh, okay, okay. Then thank you very much. Then I think we're done.
Yeah.
Okay. So 2 minutes to the floor, please. Any more questions? Okay, Teddy has. Okay, Teddy, please. The floor is yours. Be brief, please.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. I would like to, from both speakers, I'd like to know your view, your perspective as regards education, because I believe in the course of your talk you talked about orientation. So, and this orientation can come in different forms. So I would like to know your views as regards orientating the the African populace so that we can get galvanized to this unity, which is the subject of today. Thanks.
Sorry, if I may start with that, and then Mr. Okeke can actually close. One of the things that you would realize very quickly is that you can do almost nothing without some kind of education. I couched it previously by saying telling your stories, but even telling a story relates to education. I give an example. So I talked about Get Funded Africa, this platform that I have been working on to help entrepreneurs raise money for their businesses and things like that. It was supposed to just be people access our database. The technology uses this algorithm, connects your business to some of the investors, and you can actually raise funds for your business and all what have you. This was the original concept. However, one of the things we got back from many investors was that a lot of the companies were not investor ready, which then meant that we now had to go into training and education, which wasn't the original plan, but we quickly realized that you have to go into education, whatever it is that you're doing. I'm also glad that gentlemen like Mr. Elijah here on the call with his nice beach background and yellow sunny shirt also has an educational foundation that is doing a lot of work around getting people ready for loads of things and all. So I'm using this to say that education is a critical foundation that must be put in place. And in whatever it is that we're designing, developing, or what have you, education, orientation, telling our own stories is a critical component of that solution.
Okay, Mr. Okeke, please.
Okay, Teddy, thank you for the question. I've always been of the opinion that we need an overdose of education. And when I talk about education, I'm talking about education in its own holistic nature: political education, economic education, cultural education, social education, you name it. It's very important. And also, there's one thing I think will restore our pride as Black people, as African people, is that we should begin to teach our own philosophies by our own philosophers. I think most of us here, we've been taught so much about philosophers like Socrates, like Plato, like, of course, Pythagoras. We could talk about Adam Smith, Max Weber. We could talk about even Karl Marx. But again, I don't think we've ever been taught about the philosophy of, say, Kwame Nkrumah, for example, the philosophy of even Marcus Garvey, the philosophy of Thomas Sankara, the philosophy of Steve Bantu Biko, the philosophy of even Nelson Mandela. So I think when we talk about this education, it's very important for us to look at the psyche of the African individual and begin to restore our pride. And that pride is going to, of course, metamorphose to the next stage of our own understanding. When we talk about politics, when we talk about the economy and other forms of human existence. But first of all, we must restore our pride as Black people. And that means beginning to understand and recognize the relevance of our own philosophers, people that have been able to make changes within the context and the existence of the African continent, beyond just teaching us about the Pythagoras of this world. You understand? So it's very important for us to do that, and we need an overdose of it. And what do I mean by overdose? By overdose, I mean we have a lot of catch up to do. That means we have to hasten up. We have to speeden up our pace. It's very important. We live in the 21st century, and we need to really step up big time as African people. There's no time for dilly-dallying anymore. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Mr. Debo and Mr. Okeke for making out time for this. And distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in summary, African unity and Pan-Africanism are one and the same thing. It is possible for us to achieve African unity, given that we have a wealth of African youths in the diaspora who are ready to change the status quo. In this regard, we are all called up. It is our duty to free Africa from whatever shackles. It is not by picking up guns or engaging in public display of arrogance or whatnot. It is through strategic means. It is through re-educating ourselves, our brothers and sisters back home, and those all over the world, about the true meaning of African unity or African concept. It is all about Africans across the world. It is challenging, but not impossible. So at this juncture, we will have come to the end of this session, and we believe with our next sessions, we will have time for more questions, more engagement. And with this, I say thank you to our resource persons, to the audience, and to OAAD for this fantastic eye-opener webinar. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have officially come to the end of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. God bless.
God bless.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mr. Debola. Thank you, Mr. Charles. Really grateful. You guys did a mighty, mighty job.
Thank you. Thank you as well. Thank
yeah,
you.
We had 81 people register, but right now we have 18. Just the switch. And I understand this fully. A lot of people are at the point of doing a lot of things with their PhD work towards graduation and other. In fact, the person who should have been the moderator is right now in a place where she's doing a PhD proposal defense. So it's interesting, and I look far into the future. About 5 years from now, when all these people are graduated, just like Mr. Debo mentioned, 5 years from now, when everybody's graduated and we are all still working together, there's no knowing to what we can achieve. There's no we ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we ourselves can't even imagine it right now. But then we have an idea of it, and that idea of it keeps propelling us. And of course, everyone must keep putting all hands being on deck to see how much we can contribute to the process. So we'll keep us informed and always let the African community around here know what's going on. And until we create something that we know can be sufficient to help us make progress. I'm sorry I didn't come in on time. Several things running at the same time. Now myself, I came late as well, even though being part of the at the core. So it's really interesting. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much also for putting this together. We really appreciate the time. We appreciate the effort. We appreciate the resources that you've put into this. It's been worthwhile for me, and I guess I can speak for every other person on this platform. Thank you very much. We look forward to part 2 of this session.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's coming. It's coming.
It's been a pleasure being here and listening to everyone and talking to everyone. I hope that we were able to make a little bit of sense, and that the outcome from the discussion actually leads to us taking action. Because rather than always talk, and talk shops, it's very important that we begin to now take action in terms of action steps and execute them towards development. So we've talked about African unity, we've talked about what each one of us can actually do. It would be good for us to even have some kind of action steps from the discussion, and also to encourage everyone to find a way to do different things, whether it's start a business, do some research, finance research, things like that. It's very, very important for all of us. Diaspora is very important, and we are the diaspora. So rather than pointing fingers or saying government, we are the leaders actually. We are the leaders, we are the politicians, we are it. We are Africa. So let's take the steps.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And of course, as you mentioned that, let me use the opportunity to mention some action steps that are in place and have been, I can say very strongly that the discussion today have contributed to strengthening our resolve in terms of issues like policy recommendation. Currently, we have set up not less than 15 research groups that are looking at different aspects or different things from the African perspective. And we're looking at in the months ahead, as people are able to bring in their time together, hopefully we can present, because we have the experts in different areas, hopefully we can come up with some white paper that is presented by different professors, kind of created by different professors that are working with us, different professionals in different fields, to come together to create something really big. And because we are already separated, already set in these, we already have these setups on ground. So gradually they are putting things together, and we, in the days ahead, in the years ahead, people are going to hear about this. And of course, subsequent discussions are going to come where we will have more, provide more details about the things that shall follow. So thank you so much for mentioning that as well, because it's not just all about talks. We must do practical things that show that we are really ready to make the required input, which we only as Africans must do. Thank you very much for those who are still hanging around. Please feel free if you want to say something, if you want to have any discussion, please feel free. We can leave the Zoom platform to run for quite some more minutes, as long as there's someone willing to say something or doing something on it. But if there's nothing much more to say, we could close the session for the technical side. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, please, bro. Thank you. Dr. Jackson, thank you so much for the sacrifice and standing, getting the job done. It's been a good one. Dr. Teddy, thank you so much. Kehinde, I'm so excited to see that you're right here.
You're welcome, sir.
Excited to see that you're right here. And I've enjoyed quite some of your write-ups and yeah, inputs being made from different dimensions. Nancy, I just hope that this is the Nancy I know on the CAN group.
Yes, she's the same Nancy.
Okay, yeah, she makes a lot of sense, and thank you so much for being on ground, Nancy. Dr. Tosin, thank you so much for being on ground. I think, okay, Gibson should be the president of, I don't see the face, so I'm not able to say specifically, but maybe that's the Gibson here.
Yeah, the president of Kenyan students in Beijing.
Oh, great. Yeah, please, Dr. Gibson, we're really happy that you found time to be here. And just from what you heard, you see, it sounds very similar to the conversation we had at the NOGS conference just a few days ago.
Sure. And I think these are some of the conversations that we need to have if we intend to see Africa moving ahead. And as our panelists have said, I think we need to move forward from just talking and have actions points. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gibson. Thank you so much. Really nice to have you on board. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Kehinde, you did Nigeria, you did for here. Are you still on? Are you still here? Okay. All right.
I'm here. I'm in Nigeria.
Oh, great. Thank you for letting me hear your voice. I feel very happy.
You take a badis today?
Not yet.
Not yet. That means it's gonna happen.
Maybe.
It's great. Yeah. Kehinde is one of those people that made great inputs in the African community here in China, and you can see she's not tired of doing that. Still, always trying to make things happen. She has really worked closely together in some committees, and been a great thing working together. Thank you so much for your efforts and contributions. Yeah, it's great. Dr. Nja, really nice to have you here, Dr. Gideon Deme. Okay. Right.
You don't know yet. Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you also for organizing the program, Dr. Elijah.
Thank you. Really happy you guys showed up. Thank you so much. And yeah, so everyone, please feel free. Dr. Emmanuel, yeah, good to have you from the think tank of OAAD. Thank you so much. Thank you for the effort you guys made.
This name, Dr. Nja, if you look, name sounds like a Cameroonian.
Wait, so do you guys also, is Yola also your interview?
Yeah.
Never ignores you.
Okay.
Dr. Nja? Hello?
Okay.
I don't think so.
She does.
Not that kind of likable person. A lot of people don't like me.
Okay, so I'm gonna leave.
Okay,
it's like we have a new
okay, you said so.
I just come in.
If you said so. No.
Hey.
I asked all the questions. You just don't ask questions.
Ask what questions? So she doesn't like you because you ask questions.
Happy night, rest everyone.
I'm not there.
Logging off. Dr.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
You close the meeting. You close the.
Where am I? And you're telling me go back into the corner. I'm like, why?
Mm.
So
Because Nja, the Cameroonian, doesn't know that we can hear what they're saying.
No, it's busybody. Not.